All right, let's just dive right in. What if I told you that the CIA, America's premier intelligence agency, once secretly hired the Mafia to assassinate a world leader? I'm not kidding. This isn't a script for a spy movie. This actually happened. So, you gotta ask, right? Could this wild team-up actually work? You've got the most sophisticated spies on the planet on one side and the most ruthless gangsters on the other. Was Fidel Castro's number finally up?
Well, the short answer is nope. Not even close. It was an absolute disaster, a series of blunders so ridiculous it almost sounds made up. And the story of how and why it all fell apart, now that is fascinating.
Okay, so let's get into our first chapter here, the alliance itself. How in the world do these two groups, the buttoned-up government agency and the criminal underworld, even start talking? Well, it all starts with the people. So on one side, you've got the CIA bigwigs. Richard Bissell is the architect, the big picture guy for all their secret operations. And Sheffield Edwards, he's the one who had to, actually go make friends with the mob. And on the other side, we're talking about Mafia royalty. You have the legendary Chicago boss Sam Giancana and Santo Trafficante, a guy who had a huge grudge because Castro had shut down his incredibly profitable casinos in Havana. And what's really crucial to understand here is that this wasn't some rogue operation. This wasn't just a couple of agents going off the books. The order came from the very top, the Eisenhower administration, and it flowed right down the official chain of command until it was handed off to a mobster. This was, for all intents and purposes, sanctioned chaos.
But that still leaves the biggest question. Why? Why would they be so desperate that they turned to gangsters? To really get that, you have to put yourself in the mindset of the Cold War. The fear and paranoia in Washington were very, very real. I mean, just look at how fast this all unraveled. In less than 2 years, Cuba went from being an American-friendly tourist spot to a full-blown communist nation. Castro seizes American-owned businesses, and then the ultimate nightmare scenario for the U.S. Cuba officially allies itself with the Soviet Union. Suddenly, there's a Soviet partner just 90 miles off the coast of Florida.
You can just feel the panic. The CIA is picturing Soviet missiles being set up on their doorstep. And this is where the Mafia starts looking like a pretty good, if totally insane, option. They had their own reasons to hate Castro, sure. But for the CIA, they offered the perfect out. Plausible deniability. If the whole thing blew up in their faces, the government could just shrug and say, us? No, that was the mob.
So, the deal is struck. The spies and the gangsters are officially partners. Now for the fun part. Let's take a look at the brilliant plans they came up with. And seriously, this is where our story goes from a spy thriller to a straight-up comedy. Get this. We know from the declassified files that they tried to get Castro at least 8 different times. 8! And you know what the result was every single time? Total, absolute failure. Okay, so plan A is classic spy stuff. The CIA's lab cooks up these incredibly potent, tiny poison pills. The idea was simple. Have a mob contact slip one into Castro's food or drink, and bam, problem solved. Yeah, just one little problem. Turns out Fidel Castro wasn't exactly walking around unguarded. His security was like a fortress. So you've got these deadly pills being passed from one guy to the next, but nobody could ever get close enough to actually use them. So strike one. All right, so the poison pills are a no-go. Time to get creative. The CIA learns that Castro loves to go scuba diving, so they think, aha, we'll get him in the water. And their genius plan? An exploding seashell. I swear, you cannot make this stuff up. Even the CIA had to admit this one was maybe a little too much. I mean, the plan was literally to paint a seashell a bright color to attract his attention, pack it with explosives, and just hope he'd swim by and pick it up. Yeah, they scrapped that one pretty quick. Strike two. But they were not giving up on the scuba idea. Plan C. They were going to give him a gift, a brand new diving suit. The catch? The inside would be dusted with a fungus that would cause a chronic skin disease. A thoughtful, deadly gift. And can you guess what happened? It also failed. Big surprise. Apparently, the suit never even made it to him. I think we're starting to see a pattern here. Strike three. You're out. So this brings us to the really big question. Why? How could this so-called dream team of spies and killers fail so completely? Well, to understand that, we need to separate the Hollywood fantasy from the bureaucratic reality. And this really lays it all out. The popular myth is that the mob got this close. The reality? They were never anywhere near him. The myth is that it was a ghost operation that nobody knew about. The reality? The FBI knew what was going on. And maybe the biggest misconception of all? This wasn't JFK's idea. This whole mess was already in motion before he ever took office. So after all that, what was the price tag for this comedy of errors? At least $150,000. And remember, that's in 1960s money, so we're talking well over $1 million today. Just gone, on exploding seashells and poison pills that went absolutely nowhere. For 15 years, this whole embarrassing story stayed buried. But when the truth finally came out, it was an absolute bombshell. And it wasn't just a scandal. It was a turning point that would change how America's spy agencies operate forever. It all came to a head in 1975 because of something called the Church Committee. Basically, it was a massive Senate investigation into all the secret stuff the CIA had been doing. And when their final report came out, revealing these assassination plots to the world, people, well, they lost their minds. And the impact was huge, and it was fast. An executive order was signed that flat-out banned political assassinations, period. Congress created permanent intelligence committees whose whole job was to be a watchdog. And from then on, the president had to personally sign off on any covert operation. The Wild West days of the CIA were over. You know, when you boil it all down, the lesson here is pretty clear. When you have that much power with zero accountability, you're going to get some truly terrible judgment calls. It's a powerful reminder that oversight and transparency, they aren't bugs in the system, they're essential features. And that's what makes this wild story from the 60s so incredibly relevant today. I mean, think about our world now, with drone warfare, cyber attacks, and secret operations that are more complex than ever. It forces us to ask that exact same question. What guardrails do we need right now to make sure that secrecy and desperation don't team up again to create another spectacular failure? Or maybe something far worse?